This is Conor Lennon from UN News. The United Nations has been closely involved with Kosovo since well before the declaration of independence in 2008, and today plays a central role in promoting peace and security and respect for human rights in a region where memories of the wars of the late 20th century, fought between the countries of the former Yugoslavia, are still fresh to many who suffered directly or lost loved ones. On Monday, Caroline Ziadeh, the head of the UN mission in Kosovo, UNMIK, briefed the Security Council on the current situation in Kosovo and the ongoing tensions between the Albanian-speaking and ethnic Serb population. So I thought that would be the perfect opportunity to ask her to come to the UN News studios to remind us of how Kosovo came about and to assess how durable peace is in Kosovo. And before we go on, you'll notice I said the word Kosovo about 20 times there because I didn't want to say the country or the state because that is something else that is still in contention. So before we carry on, could you just explain what is the current status of Kosovo and why we can't call it a country and why it's not a UN member state?
Kosovo for the United Nations is because we are status neutral, and I will explain to you later on what does status neutral means, is considered as a territory. Because in 1999, in June, the Security Council resolution adopted a resolution 1244, establishing an interim administration, civil administration, which is UNMIK, plus it facilitated the establishment of KFOR, which is the NATO forces for Kosovo, plus OSCE to work with the communities and the EU as main partners for economic development. So these were the pillars based on which the UN acted in support of the people in Kosovo. The main role of the UNMIK is to strengthen the capacities of the institutions. And in 1244, the final solution will be negotiated and discussed between the parties within territorial integrity of the former Republic of Yugoslavia. Until the agreement will be reached between the two parties, the status of Kosovo for the United Nations is status neutral. Now, the recognition is a bilateral thing. You know that many countries, in particular 22 out of 27 member states in the EU, have already recognized Kosovo. You have within the EU 5 non-recognizers. And you have in the United Nations around 100, more or less, countries who did not recognize Kosovo. And I'm sure you followed a little bit the resolution on the membership presented last week on Friday and vetoed by the US on Palestine. This resolution explained the process. Again, recognition is a member state-led process. Membership in the United Nations is a member states-led process. It will be submitted to the Security Council, and then if it will garner the support of 9 votes without any veto, then this recommendation will be transferred to the General Assembly for a majority of 2/3 majority vote.
Right, yeah, it's quite a long drawn-out process, and I'm glad you brought up Palestine because, of course, that's on everyone's mind right now about
Yes.
the state of Palestine and the controversy around whether or not it should be a UN member state. So we're still in that kind of, as you say, what do you call it, neutral?
We are status
neutral on that. So yes, it's not up to the UN to decide; it's up to the member states to decide.
Exactly.
So let's take us back a bit. So for those who don't know the background or how the UN's involved, you said we've been there for quite a long time.
The Security Council in June adopted 1244 with the deployment of the 4 pillars that I have explained. Since then, the footprint of the UN at that point in time of UNMIK was around 10,000 people between military, police, judicial, prosecutor, judges, just to uplift the governing structure and to enable the institution to be strong enough to move forward and to recover. UNMIK played a very important role in Kosovo, and it continues, but with a recalibrated and reconfigured role. Because since 1999 till 2008, the date of the unilateral declaration of independence by Kosovo, there was a tremendous international effort to bring together every country involved in the Kosovo situation, P5 plus Germany and Italy, to make sure that all of them are on board with a Tasari plan, the special representative of the Secretary General at that point in time, to find a final or a solution for the final status of Kosovo. And that's how we always now talk about the status neutrality of the UN, because in 2008 there was supposed to be a draft resolution in the Security Council to be adopted to endorse the Ahtisaari plan. For several reasons, it didn't materialize. Kosovo unilaterally declared its independence with the two Secretary General report on the reconfiguration and recalibration of the mission, and we downsized the mission from 10,000 to 5,000. Then in 2008, we transmitted and transferred many of what we used to call executive power to the institutions in Kosovo.
Right, because over the years the institutions have been strengthening. Institutions started from scratch. It's not easy, and I was wondering, in your job, is most of your time spent on this process, or is it on more the day-to-day things, the small things that you can accomplish in terms of building dialogue between communities, little tangible things that bit by bit can help to bring communities together?
My day is spent based on several issues. First, since 2010, when the General Assembly adopted a resolution bestowing the responsibility of the political process to the EU, the UN, the mission that I'm heading now, supported the EU facilitated dialogue through our good officers and any diplomatic or political processes possible. And while doing so, we adopted a people-centered approach. We adopted this grassroots approach because you need to do two things. First, you need to identify champion for trust building and social cohesion, and you need to build up the resilience of the society to be able to absorb any progress or lack of progress in any political process. And that's why when we started the trust building activities almost 6 years ago, it was in Ljubljana. My predecessor organized the first one in 2018 with the vision that the population should come together. You referred to your personal experience. You thought that in North Ireland that it cannot happen. Then there was a champion.
Yeah, just to explain, we were saying before we started recording, I've got a lot of family in Northern Ireland, and growing up in the 80s, 90s, it seemed that this was never going to be solved, that two communities were too far apart, had completely different aims. But then suddenly it seemed, after a huge amount of work, there was a breakthrough, and now we have the two communities in government together. It's not easy, but there is dialogue. And I'm interested because when you look at the news, you might think that the two communities never speak, that there's no crossover, that they just will never talk to each other. There's no way they can ever have any dialogue. So I'm interested to know what it was like for you when you started in your current role and seeing these dialogue, these attempts at dialogue, these initiatives that UNMIK was involved in, what that was like and what that dialogue actually looked like.
It's very simple. As I already mentioned, when you are supporting the EU facilitated dialogue, you are in touch with the EU facilitator, you are in touch with the Quint ambassadors, you are in touch with your international partners on the ground, which are K4, ULEX, OSCE, and the EU, and the Council of Europe. But you are also in touch with the people, and you are using your convening power of the UN to bring them together. That's how, in my statement this morning in the Council, I reiterated the readiness of UNMIK to continue using its programmatic resources. We have a dedicated budget for us where we can support any grassroots initiative. We were talking about the Barabar Center. The Barabar Center is in both Albanian and Serb, means fairness and equality for all.
Right, the one word means the same thing in both languages.
Exactly. So this is a common ground. You start from there. The definition is the same in both languages. Then you look at the ownership, and the ownership is not ours as UN. The ownership is for one NGO Albanian and one Kosovo Serb.
But supported by the UN.
Supported by the UN, but the idea is theirs because they did round tables across Kosovo and they came up with 11 principles of trust building, led by them, produced by them, and supported by them. And they translated it into a project submitted to the UN. From that day, and in the framework of 2023, at the 5th anniversary of our trust building agenda, we decided to have two markers events. The first marker event was the launch of the Barabar Center in presence of USG Lacroix, who was visiting Kosovo and Serbia at that point.
The UN head of peacekeeping.
Peacekeeping, exactly. So we announced the launch of the Barabar Center. And the idea was, instead of taking it to the north, south, east, or west, let's bring it back to Pristina. Pristina is the center of Kosovo. Pristina is the place where everybody should meet, where for the first time in a long time, Kosovo Serbs came from North Mitrovica to Pristina, to the Barabar Center to participate and to speak up as a Serbian in a place where the majority is Albanian. And the process was a successful one. Even the initiator of this initiative, where they weren't expecting this level of success, but they did it. They did it for several reasons. First, the ownership. They took ownership of the process. Secondly, their ability to communicate. And the third item, and this is the most important one, the communality. The communality of the challenges, the communality in the endeavor, and the communality to work together to find common solution. And this is the important thing. The challenge now is how to have a multiplier effect for the Barabar Center, not only in Pristina, but across Kosovo, and how we can strengthen the ownership and the buy-in of this. That's why we took the second marker event and we brought to Thessaloniki in Greece 120 representatives of different communities and from different walks of life, including some representative of the institutions. It was, I can assure you, I witnessed this personally, it was the first time that people spoke one another.
And did it help to be in neutral ground, to take them all out of their usual
I think that it will be
environments?
easier. It will be easier to have a space where at the UN we have this famous term, safe space, when you can feel safe. And when you are safe, you can have honest conversation and you can be creative enough to find solutions. And they did it. 27 recommendations on 6 thematic areas, from women empowerment to environment, to languages, to information, misinformation, and to the rule of law. Everything impacting their daily life. Now, what we are doing in the Barabar Center is to consolidate these 27 recommendations, which will represent a footprint for us, or a blueprint for us in our programmatic activities and the trust building for the years to come, as well as to showcase that when there is a social will and people will, everything could happen.
So now, as we talk now, it sounds very hopeful. It's very different from what we hear on the news, the problems with what kind of money that different communities use, or the number plates. These kind of things are what come up in the news. But does that mean that, in fact, there are more of these kind of activities, these trust building, these dialogue activities that are taking place? Does this mean you're quite hopeful? You sound hopeful.
By definition, the UN is in two things: preventive diplomacy and sustainable development. And you cannot have any of this without hope, determination, and ability to establish partnership with your international interlocutor, and most importantly, with our implementing partners on the ground. If they are hopeful, we owe it to them just to support their hope, to allow them to work together to see the end of the tunnel.
And I just want to talk about two things, the role of women and the role of youth. Now, first of all, the role of women. I know that's an important part of your mandate in Kosovo, and just to use the Northern Ireland analogy again, over many years women were often in the forefront of broaching dialogue between two communities.
And maybe that's why it worked.
So is that the case in Kosovo?
I think what part of our women, peace and security agenda is not only to strengthen the legal framework and the policies, but also to ensure that women are allowed to participate at different level in the dialogue. At the grassroots level, which is ours, with the Barabar Center and multiple other initiatives, while empowering them economically. This will allow them to be free to speak up and to be constructively engaged at the political and in public spheres. It's extremely important for us. That's why we supported this year the 16 days of activism. It's, this is a campaign led by the UN. It was a joint effort between the Ministry of Justice, civil society organization, and international partners. It lasted for 16 days and it encompassed around 100 activities across Kosovo, from fair to participation of women, and you have so many taboos addressed on that. This is what we do. This is what we try to help, to bring people together and to align our activities in Kosovo with the priorities set not only by the headquarters based on the agendas and guidance received from the headquarters, but also anchored in the priorities set by the authorities.
And of course, these issues such as gender-based violence, they're issues that cut across women in both communities.
Exactly.
And finally, youth. There's an upcoming event, the UN Youth Assembly.
The sixth one.
The sixth. So tell me about that and how important that is.
It is important because change starts with youth. Young people are targeted and targeting. They are targeted by misinformation and disinformation, and they are targeting the future. So what we do in this youth assembly is to bring people together, young people, not only from Kosovo and across communities, but from the region. Last year, we hosted 125 youngsters and activists. This year, we aim to reach the number of 130, but more to follow after the event in May. And we extend an invitation for you to come and cover the event. The idea is, for us now, this year, is to unleash their knowledge in an AI-powered world. Entrepreneurship, politics, control of the public domain, and constructively contributed to the future, their common future. We have established small projects for small grants. So we have the opening session, then they break into working groups, and each working group is multi-ethnic. And each working group will work on a project. And then there is a committee to select the best project. This project will be financed by our support, and we gather the following year to assess and process the sustainability of these projects. So it's just a journey for youngsters. It cannot lead us except to a better future, hopefully.
Well, it sounds great, and we have witnesses now. You've invited me, so I guess I'll have to come.
Yes, on one condition: you cover the expenses of your trip.
Okay, right. Well, we'll discuss that later. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
And of course, you can on UN Web TV watch Caroline Ziadeh's address to the Security Council, which took place today. That's the 22nd of April. Caroline Ziadeh, thank you very much.
No, thank you for your time and your availability. It was a pleasure being with you, and looking forward to seeing you in Kosovo.